Okay, I'm going to do this thing. Who's got the amazing noises? I mean, you all heard the noises, right? Excuse me. Good evening, everybody. My name is Erik Arneson, and tonight I'm going to be teaching this class called Exploring the Corpus Hermeticum. This is kind of a continuation of my introduction to Hermeticism that I did a couple months ago. But first of all, here's who I am. I assume everybody probably knows this. I've been doing weird occult and tarot stuff since the 80s, and I've been practicing ceremonial magic since sometime in early 2000. I have a lot of experience with like Kabbalah and Renaissance magic and modern magic, and actually Hermeticism. I encountered the Corpus Hermeticum for the first time probably in like 2002 or 2003, and I run the Arnemancy website. So we are going to look at that. My bullet point didn't render correctly. Okay, so we're gonna do like a really quick recap of Introduction to Hermeticism. For those of you who didn't see, who don't know, I'm just gonna go through that hopefully quickly. We're gonna talk about primarily the history of the Corpus Hermeticum, the translations of it, and the majority of the talk is going to be about the contents of the Corpus Hermeticum. And then at the end, I'm going to get into a little bit of like practical Hermetic practices that you can pull from the Corpus Hermeticum. And I use the abbreviation CH for the Corpus Hermeticum in this talk a lot. I don't know that I've ever said it out loud, so I'm probably just going to be saying Corpus Hermeticum quickly and faster more the talk goes. We'll see how that goes. So the Hermetic texts in general are sort of glommed together and called the Hermetica, and they kind of like form all of the philosophical and spiritual and mystical background of Hermeticism. And they date back a long ways, you know, the first century BCE to the first century CE. And then the latest date, the like sort of the cutoff typically for classical Hermetica is kind of like the publication or the first arrival of the Asclepius, which happens sometime between the 6th and 8th century. So the Corpus Hermeticum is the most well-known. There are 17 texts. They were originally written in Koine Greek. They are numbered 1 through 18. The 15th text no longer counted. It was included in some early translations and publications of the Corpus Hermeticum, but it was written by somebody else who was not Hermetic. It introduces all the best known characters, who we'll get into in a little while. And it's not very technical. It's super mystical and philosophical, and it teaches a lot of lessons along those lines without giving you any way to like really put them into practice. The Asclepius is also a very old Greek text. The only complete versions now are in Latin. It has a really famous passage about ensoling statues, and another one about Hermes Trismegistus's prophecy about like the fall of Egypt, which had probably already happened when it was written. And then also the prayer of thanksgiving, which we will talk about a little later on. The Hermetic fragments, which are actually like a pretty big collection of Hermetica, are found sort of scattered across a number of classical works, including the Vienna fragments, which were Coptic Hermetic texts that were discovered in the 20th century. A collection preserved by Stobaeus in sort of like lessons he had for his son. The Vienna fragments, which I didn't write any notes about. The Oxford and Cambridge fragments, which are more recently discovered Greek fragments of Hermetic texts. The Nag Hammadi has some Hermetic fragments. In particular, it has the Discourse on the 8th and the 9th, which is also known by the far more metal name. The Ogdoad reveals the Ennead. And then there are lots and lots of various fragments of sort of like lost texts that have been collected in quotes by various people like Iamblichus and Zosimus and Augustine and Philo and all those kinds of folks. We also have what are called the technical Hermetica, which my feeling is the technical Hermetica is a little bit of a, it's a broad topic, but it includes a lot of astrological texts, alchemical writings, and then certain parts of the Greek magical papyri are considered technical Hermetica. And then finally, of course, the Emerald Tablet, the last of the classic Hermetica, which was probably written sometime around the 7th century. It's been hugely influential in not just alchemical traditions, but all sorts of Western esotericism and Western occultism. And it's where we get the as above, so below quote, which is like a chopped down version of what is actually said. And probably the most famous translation is by Isaac Newton, which was in 1680. And I have where as above, so below came from right down there in his original words, which, as you can see, is a lot longer than just 4 words. And then finally, the Hermetic definitions, which I'm not sure if we know the original language they were written in, but they were preserved in Armenian and probably dates back to the 6th century. And this talks about a lot of topics that are sort of like really central to Hermeticism, such as gnosis, logos, and nous. The only English translation available right now is in the Way of Hermes. I have a copy right here if you guys want to look at it. Show it to the camera. It's probably really dark. And there are a few for sale here if anybody wants one. This is my favorite. I'll talk about that translation in a little bit. And then, of course, there's also the Kybalion, which is not a Hermetic text. And if you're interested in Hermeticism, reading the Kybalion is just going to send you down a wrong path, which we're not going to talk about tonight. Just, it's not good. Don't read it. So Hermeticism, it probably wasn't a really huge movement when it originally happened, and it kind of died out very quickly, but a lot of the Hermetic texts got translated into Arabic. And the Emerald Tablet, for instance, I think our oldest edition of it is in Arabic. And so a lot of the Hermetic texts kind of faded from history in Europe, in the Latin or Christian world. But the ones that survived, the Emerald Tablet and the Asclepius, were available in the West. Asclepius only in Latin, and it had a really big influence on medieval alchemy and magic in Europe. Then in the Renaissance, Cosimo de' Medici got into his whole thing. He acquired the Corpus Hermeticum manuscripts. In 1463, he commanded Marsilio Ficino to stop translating Plato and to translate the Corpus Hermeticum instead. Ficino translated it into Latin. It was kind of a flawed translation, but we won't talk about that very much. But Hermes Trismegistus ended up being seen as this ancient sage that predated Moses and was possibly Moses' teacher. So for like 150 years, maybe 200 years, the Catholic Church, a lot of Christian stuff happening around that time, viewed Hermes Trismegistus as like this ancient sage who influenced Christianity. And then, Pico della Mirandola was around the same time, but he did sort of like, he was kind of one of the progenitors of Christian Kabbalah, but he was also way into the Corpus Hermeticum that Ficino had translated. And so he kind of like integrated Hermeticism with Christian Kabbalah, which is why we have the mess we have today. I am a fan of Pico, but he was a character. All right. So English translations of the Corpus Hermeticum started a lot later. The first translation was in 1650. We've had a number of translations since then. Some of them have been from one of the Latin translations. Some of them have been from the original Greek. Some of them are very flowery and filled with a lot of extra stuff that maybe doesn't really need to be there. And there is a new translation that I don't know very much about that I will that I gave an entire slide to, even though I don't have much to say about it. The first English translation was by John Everard, who was an English preacher. He did a lot of translations and a lot of preaching, but he published his translation of the Corpus Hermeticum titled The Divine Pymander in 1650. This is a great year for English occultists. In 1650, we had the Divine Pymander, we had Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, and we had the Rosicrucian manifestos all translated into English for the first time. So it was a great year to be an occultist. Everybody was spending their money at Darkstar Magic in 1650, wherever Darkstar Magic was. But it was the first complete English translation, and it has influenced English-speaking esotericism and occultism for centuries, like even up to now. It's still in print. It's still being reprinted and reproduced. I have one here from, I think, the 40s or 50s that I just picked up that I really like. But while Everard is really fun to read, like he's got a very Shakespearean sort of early modern English, it's maybe not the most accurate translation. I think I read somewhere and couldn't track it down again that he had done his translation from one of the Latin translations and not from Greek. But in addition, the books are all out of order, so you have to like go by the titles instead of the numbers. So if you're having a conversation with other Hermeticists, it's tough to use Everard unless you want to sound really flowery. Then it's great if you know exactly what to look. G.R.S. Mead was the next English translator. He was a theosophist, which is problematic in itself, but he was a pretty prolific guy. He published The Thrice Greatest Hermes in 1906, and it was in 3 volumes, which is amazing. Like you can see the size of the Way of Hermes here. It's like maybe 120 pages. Like this is all you really need if you're just doing a translation of the Corpus Hermeticum. So in Thrice Greatest Hermes, there are a lot of Hermetic fragments, and it was actually like the only source for English translations of non-Corpus Hermetica up until extremely recently, up until David Litwa published Hermetica 2. In addition to Hermeticism, Mead also wrote a lot about Neoplatonism and Gnosticism. He was an influential fellow. So in 1992, Brian Copenhaver, who looks like a very friendly fella, published Hermetica, which is probably the first real academic translation of the Corpus Hermeticum. It was entirely from Greek sources. It's got this incredible scholarly introduction that is absolutely worth, like the book, it's kind of expensive for a paperback, but it is so worth getting. Like the introduction is incredible. It'll teach you lots of stuff about where the Corpus Hermeticum came from, how Hermeticism sort of developed in the ancient world, all that kind of stuff. And then my favorite translation, probably because it's the most accessible, is The Way of Hermes, which was published in 1999. And it was translated primarily by Clement Solomon with the help of Doreen Van Ooyen and others. It kind of has this like poetic feel to it. It's a delightful book. It's small, so you can take it with you when you travel on the train, and that's one of the things that I love about it. It also has this interesting introduction by Gilles Gispel. I can't say his name. He's from southern Belgium, so I can't really pronounce his name. Anyhow, he's got some interesting theories about Hermeticism and where it came from. I'm not sure how historically accurate they are, but the book itself is really nice, easy to carry around, and kind of a delight to read. And then there is a very recent translation by David Litwa. He was the translator of Hermetica 2, which is a collection of Hermetic fragments. And I think it's out. I haven't read it. I haven't paid very much attention to it, so I don't know what's going on with it. I feel like if there's one slide in this talk that's going to like outline my failure as a hermeticist, this is the one. So if you guys want to like take a selfie with it or anything like that, I'm cool with that. We can do that later. Okay, now let's get into the good stuff. So the Corpus Hermeticum, like I said before, it's not super big. It's kind of dense sometimes. It's got a lot of stuff packed into it. And it doesn't always agree with itself very well. A lot of different parts of the Corpus Hermeticum contradict each other, sometimes on some really significant points, which can kind of make it tough to pull Hermeticism together as like a cohesive theology. But we'll talk about that a little bit. So the divine origin of humanity, pretty much everything in the Corpus Hermeticum agrees on that. There's this idea of like duality of like the soul versus matter. The Corpus Hermeticum is pretty well split. Sometimes it's like, yes, this is true. Sometimes it's like, no, it's all the same. There's a lot of talk about the nature of God and the cosmos and how they're related. Primarily, the cosmos is kind of presented as like this divine manifestation that happens through like layers of creation, which probably comes from Neoplatonism, and we know now as like emanationism. And then there's also this idea of like salvation through knowledge, but it's a little more complicated than that. We will dive into that a little bit more. The Corpus Hermeticum is presented as a bunch of like dialogues and conversations between these main characters, the only characters in the book. Hermes Trismegistus is the teacher for the majority of the dialogues, where he like is instructing either Tat or Asclepius or both of them. In the first book, he is presumably the narrator, and he's actually being instructed by Poimandres, the nous of God. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then in the later books, in the last couple, there is a character that is sometimes called King Ammon and sometimes the King, and he is the student of either Tat or Asclepius. So there's kind of like 4 generations of characters where Poimandros teaches Hermes, Hermes teaches Tat and Asclepius, and then the 2 of them instruct King Ammon or the King. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go through some themes that are present in the Corpus Hermeticum. I'm going to kind of like mention some individual books where those themes are pulled up. I don't want you to imagine that this is exhaustive at all. I'm going to, because it's dense. There's a lot of stuff to go through, and I'm not going to read the book to you. I'm just going to talk about the themes, where you can find them in the book. I definitely didn't get every single instance of them. I just sort of like pulled out some spots that have been significant to me, or have really stood out to me in the past. And the first and possibly one of the most important is the concept of nous. There's kind of possibly multiple types of nous in the Corpus Hermeticum. The big one seems to be sort of like the divine nous. In earlier translations, nous is translated simply as like mind, but apparently the word is a lot more nuanced than that, and it can mean like mind or some sort of like guiding force. It's hard to translate directly. In the first book, Poimandres, the nous of God, Poimandres, comes down and visits the narrator, supposedly Hermes Trismegistus, and leads him on a little visionary adventure. We see some other definitions or attempts at definitions of nous throughout the Corpus Hermeticum. In book 11, that nous isn't God, but is does that happen? But that like our individual souls nous, not everybody. That's the Corpus Hermeticum was pretty clear about that. So nous enters into the soul, and then the soul enters into matter. And then in book 12, with this concept of nous being an image of God, which I think sounds kind of Neoplatonic to me. It's such a strange concept that you have to read the Corpus Hermeticum to really see what the heck it's talking about. The Corpus Hermeticum has multiple creation stories, and talks a lot about sort of like the structure of creation, the structure of the cosmos. In the first book, Hermes is led by Poimandres through this whole visionary experience of creation. And this involves sort of like a descent from of light into darkness, a boiling up of creation, the sudden existence or the creation of nature and all that kind of stuff. Corpus Hermeticum, book 3 has a very brief creation story, but it talks about God being the origin of all things, including other gods. Book 1 and book 3 don't really agree with each other, but book 1 has kind of a lot more detail, and book 3 is very, very short. And then in book 8, we get this sort of description of the eternal nature of God. And this is something I'm going to come back to a few more times, the indestructible order of celestials, which I think is a great term, but it refers to the celestial spheres, how they were sort of like set in motion and set into place in order to like govern various parts of creation. And then so in book 8 we have this image of man, or this description of sort of like man begotten in the image of the cosmos. So it's easy to get lost in the creation stories in the Corpus Hermeticum, but they don't totally agree very well. So it kind of, the impression that you get in book 1 is that Hermes experiences the story of creation through this like visionary journey. And maybe that's really, really important to Hermeticism. And maybe that's something that people who practice Hermeticism tried to emulate or tried to do for themselves. Yes?
I have a question.
Okay.
How did Abrahamic Hermetic scholars reckon with the basic elements of the text in addition to the simple monotheism?
That is a good question, and I don't think they reckoned with it very well. I mean, they didn't really. I don't know of any instances where they really encountered it very much until the Renaissance, and then I think mostly they just glossed over it. I think they did it primarily by ignoring it. They reckoned with it by ignoring it, probably. But also, that's way after the Corpus Hermeticum. I'm not covering that in this class. I don't have to answer that question, or I'll talk about it at the end. That is a good question, though. That I don't think that they've done I don't think that Abrahamic scholars and Abrahamic religions who thought that Hermes Trismegistus was one of the teachers of Moses did a very good job of reconciling. Are they okay with that answer? Okay. All right. So the next. Okay. So the next topic, the nature of God. This is sort of a really big one in the Corpus Hermeticum, and you get so many different views of this, and so many different sort of like things that try to like define God as knowable, and then define God as unknowable, or not define God at all. In Corpus Hermeticum 2, there's this whole little thing about like God moves but is not moved. It's totally like a prime mover sort of situation, which, as we all know, is very paradigmatic. But we kind of overlook that and continue enjoying the Corpus Hermeticum. And also in this text, God is sort of defined as the Father, which is not agreed with in other Corpus chapters of the Corpus Hermeticum, where God is not the Father, but the Father is like an emanation of God. In Corpus Hermeticum, book 4, we learn that God is not only omnipresent, but that creation is an ongoing process. Like it hasn't stopped. You know, we live in a cosmos that is still being formed and still being moved by by God. Corpus Hermeticum 5 is the one that tells us that God is not the Father, but also that God is possibly incomprehensible, which doesn't totally clash with what other books of the Corpus Hermeticum say. And then Corpus Hermeticum Book 11 starts with Hermes Trismegistus having a conversation with Nous, saying like, I don't know what the heck's going on. I don't know what God is. And then Nous sort of goes on to explain, oh, God is the source of everything. It's cool. It's so basically the entirety of the Corpus Hermeticum doesn't really agree on the nature of God, but primarily there seems to be this impression that you can reach an understanding of God or a presence of God through the development of nous and through the development of virtue and understanding like the universal good. The funny thing about Book 11 is that it's 11 books in. Hermes has been teaching Tat and Asclepius. Oh, we have got a question.
Yes.
I should look at this one, I think. Probably
I'll let
same.
you read it.
Okay, hold on. I'll open the chat. If the Corpus Hermeticum was not written in super ancient Egypt, but more modern Ptolemaic, could it have influenced the Abrahamic or vice versa? Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a really good possibility that it was influenced by possibly like early Judaism. I don't know that it necessarily, I'm sure that it probably interacted with early Christians too, but I don't know. I don't think we have a lot of really good information on that. And then I know the Corpus Hermeticum doesn't ever mention God as the mother. That was, but yeah, that doesn't happen in the Corpus Hermeticum. But there is some stuff about gender in Corpus Hermeticum. We'll get to that in a little bit. So the Corpus Hermeticum has this story, especially in Book 1, where man with a capital M, Anthropos, who's sort of like the godlike form of humankind that we are all fragments of, views the creation of nature with a capital N and falls in love with nature and descends into creation to live in nature and kind of be her caretaker. And this happens, and then later on in Book 1, Hermes is like, okay, you've shown me how that happened, but now how do we get back? How do we get back to the divine? But that idea isn't always totally present. Corpus Hermeticum 7 in the Corpus Hermeticum tells us that people are really stupid, that we fall prey to the temptations of the flesh and the temptations of vice all too often, and that what we need to be doing is we need to be rejecting the material, we need to be rejecting material pleasures, and that is the only way to be mystical enough to return to the divine source. But we also have some other ideas, like in Book 10, we're told that if you can get your soul to reach a point where it can behold the supreme good, that your soul can sort of like become God or become like God while it is still in your body, while you are still alive. So sort of like this vision of kind of like an enlightened state, of like a hermetically enlightened state. And then Book 13 primarily talks about how a person can ascend through the spheres to return to a divine state by defeating your 13 tormentors using 10 divine powers, which seems to kind of like lead to this sort of bodiless immortality, which is also described in Book 10, where the soul, or where the nous, the individual's nous, is able to leave the body and and wear a cloak of fire that leads them to sort of like the divine experience. Both the first and the 13th books have a description of ascending through the spheres to gain access to the divine. Book 1 doesn't really give a lot of details. Book 13 kind of tells you how to do it, but not with a lot of detail. So dualism is something that is sometimes present in him, but not all the time. We get sort of like these in Hermeticum, which is sometimes called the symbol or the crotter of Hermes. There's this whole thing about like the struggle of material existence, about how not every human has access to use. So there's a big share of it that's bull, and those who are able to access it, like bathe in the crater and the bowl and like but not everybody is able to bridge the gap between material and spiritual world. Book 7, as I talked about before, the previous one, tells us that we are trapped in our body by vices and rejecting the material world, that we can achieve any sort of like spiritual transformation. And then in book 10, we're told that the soul is separated from the divine by incarnating and inhabiting.
Can you check the connections and getting video and audio is really choppy?
Okay. Looking for this one. I am not. Maybe I can connect to your Wi-Fi. Okay, let me see if I can do that. I don't have your Wi-Fi password.
Eric yells it across the room. No one else will get it. Don't worry.
I don't even see Dex by magic here. Oh. I see it. What's that? I already had it.
Oh, you are connected?
Yeah, I am now. Hopefully that's better. My soul. Okay, it looks like I'm still here. Am I doing okay?
Is that an issue? Leave it in the comments.
Okay. All right. So yes. And we're told that the soul is separated by the divine when it incarnates into a human. But there's lots of non-dualism as well. Book 5 has this great quote that I screwed up the formatting on, but it says, "The finest part of matter is air, of air soul, of soul nous, of nous God." In book 11, depends on eternity, and eternity depends on God. And then in book 16, which I think is Asclepius's teachings to King Ammon, the spiritual world depends on God, and the physical world on the spiritual. So there's sort of this like smooth train that doesn't feel anything like dualism. In fact, the Hermetica, there's this emphasis on divine immanence. You know, the presence of the divine, where we aren't necessarily separated from the divine as much as we are kind of like living inside it. There's kind of more of a non-dualist most of the time, and this kind of separates it from a lot of Gnostic sects, if you are into Gnosticism. So you know, it's fair to describe Hermeticism sometimes as pantheist, or probably pantheist, but maybe not. I feel like I probably would get yelled at if I said that too loudly, so pretend I whispered it. But there is sort of like this idea of notice, of like lived experience, of direct experience being essential to spiritual knowledge in the Corpus Hermeticum. I mean, Book of Poimandres is like all about that. You know, the whole thing is like the narrator sinks into this trance and is sent on this visionary journey that teaches them the story of creation, introduces them to the divine, gives them this whole mystical experience where they come back and like spontaneously spout this prayer about how they're so devoted to this idea that they're going to spread to others. Book 4, the Crater or Bull of Hermes has sort of like this path to higher things. In Book 9, there's this concept of like sense perception being tied into understanding not only the cosmos but like the divine presence. I think that there's definitely a good chance that Christian Gnosticism, and Hermeticism did influence each other just because of how these ideas kind of intermixed, but it also could have been a pretty common belief in all sorts of mystical schools around that time, including like Neoplatonism and stuff like that. And then in Book 10, there's this idea that well, it's not an idea. It just sort of says it outright. Like knowledge is incorporeal. The mind is an instrument used by knowledge. So is knowledge that is gained direct experience, and a lot of times it's kind of portrayed as something that is possible to communicate accurately to others. One of my favorite things about the Corpus Hermeticum is when it talks about imagination and the imagination. Really use that word. Maybe it does. I mean, it's written in Greek. I don't know what the Greek word for imagination is. But we have all these ideas of how or thoughts that are held in the mind or held in the nous can kind of like directly influence or experience and your mystical expertise. There's this, I think this is probably an Everard quote here, but I don't know. It's just the one that is always stuck in my mind. Hold in thy mind that thou wouldst know, and I will teach thee. And this is what Poimandres says to Hermes. Hermes is in his trance. Poimandres, like, I'm here, I'm the nous of God. And Hermes is like, oh my God, what are you here for? He says, everything you want to know, hold it in your mind, and I will teach it to you. Book 5 has this great passage talking about how those things that are not manifest, that don't have a material form, are also real. That the imagination is real, that reality arises from imagination, not the other way around. And it's sort of, I could probably talk about that for a long time, but I'm not going to. But it's a great passage. It's right at the beginning of Book 5. And then Book 11 has this like astral travel sort of to it, where Hermes, I think, says to Tax, command your soul to go anywhere and it will be there quicker than command. And then it has this whole list of like, you can go like fly among the pyramids or travel along rivers or go up into the spheres. Like, it's basically saying that like your imagination and what which, as we know, exists in the soul is just as real as the material world. And I think that's one of the key parts of Hermeticism for me. There is a lot of light and darkness symbolism sort of scattered throughout the Corpus Hermeticum. I don't find it to always be super profound or very unusual. It kind of goes along with almost everything you see and everything else in Western Hermeticism. And again, the Corpus Hermeticum is very old. Maybe that's what inspired it. I'm not sure. But in book 1, in the Poimandres, part of Hermes' vision of creation talks about the darkness and kind of bubbling, kind of like material world and all of nature and all that kind of stuff. 7, the Preachy book, it goes on about how ignorance is darkness, that the fabric of evil is like all this stuff is bad stuff is darkness, and then light is portrayed as sort of like this knowledge, divine presence. And then in book 13, which has sort of like the plan for using to defeat the tormentors. The tormentors are described as being from the state of being when you manage to ascend to the spheres. It is described as a place where life and light are united. So I guess the main thing here is, if you're reading the Corpus and you come across instances of light and darkness, it's fit into everything you've been taught by Western society. It fits very well. No surprises there. Hermeticism is not monotheistic. I think we kind of talked a little bit about earlier, but mentions of like other gods are kind of limited. In the first book, the story of creation talks about like the 7 powers or the 7 planets that are created to sort of like govern the whole material world. They're described as being beyond gender and sublime. The Corpus Hermeticum 2 has kind of like a little throwaway bit about all the gods are honored, praise the god. Book 12 has a bit about where Agathos Daimon, who is separate from God, that means the good spirit, calls the rest of the gods immortal men. And then in book 16, we do get this whole thing about sort of like spirits, which are separate from gods. Every single one of them is one of the stars, and they have sort of like authority and influence over all of earthly affairs. And it kind of goes on to describe it's in a very astrological sense. Astrology is one of the Hermetic science. Book 16 kind of is probably the strongest tie to that. And then I didn't write down where this comes from. Is it 12? There's this whole thing about the sun, sort of like one of the primary gods. That might have been 12. I think it might be 12. Where it's sort of seen as like the primary receiver of divine light who sort of doles it out amongst the gods and amongst the mortal. You're looking at me like you know.
The sun is the demiurge.
Well, I don't know if it uses that word.
Sure, demiurgos is in there.
Well, I was reading it in English. So we do see stuff in the Corpus. There's nothing in there that sort of like preaches that there's only one God or that there's only, that worshiping other gods is going to like remove you from the auspices of Hermeticism or anything like that. It was developed in a polytheistic society and has polytheism kind of like baked into it. One of the big themes that is sort of spread throughout the Hermeticum is this idea of like escaping your fate. It kind of teaches, and this is something that I'm not sure that anything in the Corpus Hermeticum really disagrees with, but like those who don't have access to nous, who don't have access to like the krater, the bowl full of nous described in book 4, and it is pretty explicit about saying that not every human being can access nous. those people are tied to their fate and probably can't escape it. But you kind of get these hints throughout all of the books that, like, the big goal when you sort of ascend spheres is that you escape sort of your fate. You escape the destiny that is written for you in the stars. And we see this sort of like in a lot of places throughout these books. In book 10, I think I might have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but that managed to ascend to the spot where they can behold the supreme good, become God while they are still in their human bodies. And by doing that, they become the controllers of their destiny and not those controlled by destiny. Book 12 says that everybody is subject to destiny, but there's this really cool bit that sort of talks about how divination works and why divination works. It's just a few sentences, and that's kind of fun to read and ponder. And it also sort of mentions and discusses how humans are able to partake of divine nature and possibly escape destiny. And then book 13, which is a very initiatic text, it has you have when you use your divine powers to overcome tormentors, you ascend through all of the spheres. You ascend beyond the 8th sphere until you have escaped. I misplaced my water bottle. How is that even possible? It's huge. Thanks. But once you escape the 8th sphere, you are beyond the sphere of the zodiac and thus no longer bound by the stars, which would be controlling your destiny. Oh, question.
How is divination explained?
Oh, God. I think I can remember exactly where they are. Let me see if I can read them. It's so dark in here. Here we go. Is this it? Yes. Now every living. This is book 12, verse 19. Now every living creature is immortal by virtue of nous, man above all, for he can receive God and he shares God's essence. God communicates with this creature alone, through dreams by night and through signs by day. Through all these, he foretells to man the future. Through entrails inspiration and the sacred oak. Thus man proclaims the past, present, and future. It's short, kind of cryptic. There's probably a little bit more after that, but it talks about, like, basically the divine presence in the things that you are divine, and the things you divine is what enables divination to work.
I have a question about the stars controlling one's destiny. When they talk about that, is it like kind of referring to one's astrological chart?
Well, in a way, but it's like it's a very old form. It's like Hellenic astrology, you know. It was just sort of figured that everything was together in kind of like a big sort of clockwork thing. So you were controlled by destiny the same way that like Aristotle would describe, that we're all part of the same long chain of cause and effect that stretches back to creation. But the planets and the stars are like very significant cogs in the way all of that moves. You know, the one of the books talks about how there are subservient spirits. Book 6, how there are subservient spirits, each one of them attached to a star. And of course, there's an infinite number of stars in the sky, and all of them are responsible for the way everything in the material world works. It's not a view of free will that meshes very well with the modern mind. We are not taught to think about the world that way, so it's kind of a terrifying and stifling way to look at the world. But the Corpus Hermeticum and the sort of system is sort of there to help you escape that. So yes, I guess it is tied to your chart, but of course nobody back then would have had a chart unless they're stupid rich, right? Like, so nobody would have actually known what their chart was. They might have known some things about it, possibly, but probably.
Then that's an element of what this is an origin point that's come from the during Renaissance, like perception of like the chain of being.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is part of it. That great chain of being. It I mean, it occurs in a lot of philosophy. Like Aristotle has it, Plato has it. Like it kind of shows up over and over again. But yeah, the Corpus Hermeticum definitely is into that thing. Yeah. All right. I'm going to get into some practical elements. It's a really mystical book. It's when you read it, you need to gloss over the things that it actually says, like, hey, you should do this, because there aren't very many of them, and a lot of it is kind of baffling and yes.
Oh, there it is. It was taking a long time for your screen to change.
Okay. So how can the Corpus Hermeticum actually be put to practice? I do think read it. Like the Way of Hermes is very short pages up. So it's not a long read. It's something that you probably have to read over again to make a lot of sense out of. But it's worth and inspire a lot of insight. The Corpus Hermeticum does talk a little bit about like meditation. In book 1 in particular, meditation that seems pretty simple. The narrator, presumably Hermes Trismegistus, talks about relaxing and being a sleepy, almost liminal state when the Poimandres comes and leads him on his visionary journey. There are some prayers in the Corpus Hermeticum, and even the preachy book 7 just tells them things that you can do to be more devoted to the idea of sort of like healing soul and gaining access to nous, ascending to see divine. And I think that this leads to kind of like a path of a lot of self-examination. And the book one does tell us about having a vision through some state of altered consciousness, and that seems like it's possibly an important part of Hermeticism. Although there are other parts of the Corpus Hermeticum that say don't do drugs. So don't do drugs, kids. So no. Ethical purification or virtue work is really, really core to certain parts of the Corpus Hermeticum. Book 13 in particular is very important. It puts a lot of importance on this, where you are supposed to sort of like embrace these sort of like divine power similar to virtues and use those to defeat your own foul passions and dirty vices. So you are supposed to sort of like cultivate the virtues. Moral discipline is very important. And then, the preachy book does tell you that you're supposed to like ignore everything material. It's the only one that tells you that you should be that ridiculous about it. But the initiatory nature of book 13, I think, can be very inspiring when it comes to you like trying to figure out like, what does virtue mean to me? What does vice mean to me? How holding me back, or how are they helping me? So that's part of it. I think that the Corpus Hermeticum is really big on us learning more. We should study the order of the cosmos. We should study how things are put together. There are those passages about like knowledge being immaterial, but being something that like uses the soul to move forward. So we should look into learning. And then also, I think something that's very, very important in the Corpus Hermeticum is that it doesn't seem to be something that happens in a vacuum. Hermeticism needs to be talked about. You need to share your experience with others. You need to find like-minded people. You should come to every single Darkstar Magic class and around you. But in particular, like find folks that you can talk to about your Hermetic experience. See what other people are doing and experiencing, and have conversations with them about what's going on. There are a couple devotional elements that I'm going to get into that are present in the Corpus Hermeticum, but overall it doesn't a lot of really solid practices that you can pursue. It's easy to approach it as just sort of like a philosophical text. So these other things are kind of easy to miss, and now you have to have some suspense while I have a drink of water. All right, so devotional elements in the Corpus Hermeticum. In Book 1, after Poimandres has his mystical vision of creation. When he comes back, he comes up with this amazing prayer of devotion and thanksgiving, which has sort of like these oaths that he takes to the divine, one of which is he promises to share his knowledge with others and to try to bring others to see the light, the kind of like divine vision that he did. It's easy to adapt for individual use. It's probably the one that I use the most. Books 5 and 12 both contain the same sort of like formula of devotion that is probably originally a prayer. It's pretty easy to turn into a prayer. Book 12 is a little more concrete, but it's repeated in both of those. Book 13 concludes with the secret hymn, which is very long and very amazing and is definitely worth reading. I have not memorized it. It is one of my many faults. But it's a and it's definitely worth incorporating. And then the Asclepius, which is not part of the Corpus Hermeticum. So this is a little bit of a bonus. It concludes with the prayer of thanksgiving, which is fairly short, fairly easy. It feels non-denominational, so you could like use it at family Thanksgiving and nobody else will let you. But it's totally worth memorizing and using. In particular, it sort of ends with kind of like this description of like this ritualized dinner, where they're all sort of hanging out in a cave, having this like long mystical dialogue, and afterward, and they use this Thanksgiving. So I think it's a good one to know, and it's very worth your efforts. All right, so I know that there are some Hermeticists in the audience online here, and I just went through the whole Corpus Hermeticum in an hour, and I'm sure that I missed some important themes, or I missed some spots where some of those themes sort of popped up in various places, and I'm sure that things that some of you are going to disagree with. T. Snow chatting with somebody on Discord right now, probably. Sam's probably criticizing me.
He said he DM'd you a bunch of stuff.
Well, I don't have.
No, I know. I told him.
So I do want to hear from Hermeticists out there. Like, what did I miss, and what did I get wrong, and what is Sam mad about?
He just sent me in all capitals. The prayer of thanksgiving talks about inseminated wombs.
Well, I mean, that's a thing that happens sometimes.
I mean, yeah, it does.
Not really dinner table conversation.
I mean, it depends on your family.
That's
Doesn't it?
true.
I mean, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
Don't ask me. I don't have.
This is maybe a pedantic academic question, but what I want to ask, that was a good overview of the
Okay.
translations. But what about the massive 4-volume Walter Scott edition?
Oh crap! I skipped that one.
Is that, I mean,
Um,
that was my introduction, and it's like I spent a third of my life being a classicist, and I thought that that's the one I was supposed to read.
So-
because it's so much.
So that's a good one. That you know, I think actually I did screw that up. I squished together Walter Scott and G.R.S. Mead in my mind
Oh.
sometimes. Scott translation is the one that has all of the available translation of a lot of like the Hermetic fragments. That's where that was. I totally screwed that up. I'm gonna have to put another slide in there now. But I have not read Scott's translation. I've read parts of it. I think I've read parts of that and parts of G.R.S. Mead's, but I don't think you're going super wrong. It's just there's more modern stuff that's going to serve you better. It's going to be more accurate. Because Scott might not have done his from the Greek. I don't know exactly. That is a good question. I'm sorry that I can't answer it. Sam says it's okay to forget about Walter Scott. It's not worth it as a translation. So there you go. Sorry. Anything else? I know Sam has questions.
This may be beyond the expertise, but I've always thought of Hermetic as kind of like the Western Tantra because it is written in a very similar kind of like dialogic style. It provides like, you know, spiritual advice and development and these things.
It's not my expertise, but I don't know if it's a fair description. I mean, maybe in like a really broad, sure. But I think that be careful when you're comparing like Hindu spiritual traditions
I was
to
thinking more like the Vajrayana or like Buddhist traditions.
oh right.
So,
Well, I think you have to be really careful with that because a lot of that sort of tainted by the mess that the Theosophists made. So I would say there are parallels, but I'm not sure how closely they really correspond.
well, I mean, less the, like, more like the style of and presentation. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of tantras are written as the message and practice,
Uh-huh.
or like, you know, understanding. So it's like, you know, in the tantras, you know, dispense things. There's, I mean, this provides a path
Yeah.
forward in terms of like practices and paths, like not.
Okay, well, I do have so there's definitely a parallel there, but main parallel is that a lot of philosophical literature in the West has been presented in the form of dialogues. So it's kind of a common form for stuff to be presented, of like texts having sort of like a second esoteric, very old tradition in the West that developed separately from developed in the East, but we don't know. Like, partly because we don't have written records that go back far enough to tell us. So I'm not sure that we can say for certain, but you know, I would say though, like if you're super familiar with the project, and understanding those help you get into something like the Corpus Hermeticum, use that as a parallel, but avoid the dark trap of perennialism. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, now Sam is how do you recite the prayers of the Corpus Hermeticum, or for what?
While you're answering that, somebody else asked if you could go back to the slide that mentioned spirits.
Ooh, I bet let's see. Oh, I know that slide. Yes, let me go back to that. Mhm. I really, really like that quote. The finest part of matter is air, of air soul, of soul nous, of nous God. So this describes a kind of emanationist view of how matter exists. The thing about air, like it doesn't mean air the way we understand it now, but sort of like the elemental air of the classical world. But air and soul were like very closely tied together. That particular quote shows up a couple times in the Corpus Hermeticum, sometimes a little more clear and sometimes a little less clear. I think it's really worth sitting with. I think that it does a really good job kind of like outlining a lot of the cosmology of the Corpus Hermeticum very quickly, especially if you enjoy the non-dualist approach to it. But I'm not really sure. Do you have additional questions about this particular slide? Let's see. I'll answer Sam's question next. How or when do you recite the prayers of the Corpus, or for what? I primarily use the prayer at the end of book 1, the Point Madras prayer, like my opening invocation for any sort of spiritual or magical work that I do. Like it's my go-to prayer for almost everything. The prayer of Thanksgiving I use when I'm having food with other people that I'm having spiritual conversations with. The other ones, I think that they would be pretty specific. I don't use them very often. I don't use very many prayers that I don't have memorized. I don't enjoy reading them out of books. So until I have the secret sermon memorized, I'm not sure what I will use it for. And then Sam says, could questions from the in-person audience be repeated closer to the microphone because it's hard to hear them? Sam, that will happen as soon as more questions. Sorry that I didn't do that before.
And this chapter 5, air
Yeah.
is definitely the element of air in if I remember something that goes on.
It's air itself. Air is mentioned kind of throughout the Corpus Hermeticum. In fact, there's a portion in the book that talks about like the prime mover, CH2, I think, book 2, where they go into kind of like the nature of air and how things that move in air, like air is mentioned over and over. It's a big portion. You asked the question, I didn't repeat it. If in this book, if the element of air is really what's meant by air and not something else like ether. So yes, that's what I was asking. Yeah, it's definitely sort of like the element of air. You don't really see the word ether used in modern translations of the Corpus Hermeticum. I'm not sure where that would really fit into it. Even when there's talk of like your soul sort of like ascending up, you don't really run into ether. It's just air all the way up, which as we know now would be disastrous. We don't want the sun touching our air. Are there any other questions? Ava, did you have any questions about the air slide? Okay. All right. So, you're welcome. Anything else, or any more questions? You can ask me other questions too.
Can you go deeper into the quality?
I can if you have a laxative.
Got a question for you. So there are some people who don't have access to news,
Yeah.
and does it talk about like what the qualities of experience those people will have versus the people who do have access to news? How will your life be different? I'm assuming it doesn't say something like you can just look at somebody who don't have access to news, or maybe it does say something.
Well, if they're reading the Kabbalah, no. There is sort of like a little bit of talk about like people who just engage in like the baser parts of humanity, like who hurt others, who do mean things all the time, who don't care about virtue, who don't do anything to ever help or assist their fellows, who are just sort of like rotten people. It's kind of like a way of just saying like some people are just rotten, I think. I personally don't enjoy that sort of concept. You do see that pop up in a lot of books in Western esotericism, where like, you have to be chosen, you have to be special if you're going to be doing this. I don't totally like that. I tend to believe that everybody is redeemable, but it's a tough choice. You have to actually like decide to do it. And then also in that book, in book 4, it does talk about like there's an element of like people have to like choose to go bathe in the bowl of nous, So maybe everybody does have access in some sense.
Let me ask you this follow-up question then. So one of the ways I kind of judge things is or philosophical systems or occult systems is do you express empathy for other people or for animals? And when I hear things like some people don't have nous or access to nous, to me that sounds like I don't know, like the next paragraph is going to be something about how slavery is good.
Well, okay, so that doesn't actually happen in the Corpus Hermeticum. What we do see, like in book 1, when Hermes has his vision of creation, there is a thing that happens where nature is created, and Hermes falls in love with it. And it's like or man, the primordial man, the divine man is like, I love this so much, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to go and be a part of this and take care of it and like be in it. So I don't think that there's anything in there that sort of like expresses a lack of empathy. Some of the, book 7 might be the exception, where whoever wrote that was like really, really mad at people who were jerks. But not all of the Corpus Hermeticum agrees with each other. It's obviously a bunch of different writers. I mean, there's nothing in it that is really talking about like the golden rule or practicing service. Like a lot of it is very like self-improvement kind of stuff. But there's also nothing in there that's like some people deserve to be slaves or some people deserve to be murdered. It's like, as an individual, if you're into this stuff, you probably have access to nous, and your goal is to now behold the supreme good and thus become divine. So I don't know. I do think that there's something in that that's kind of missing, though. It lacks the kind of like tikkun olam idea that Kabbalah has, where the whole goal is to like heal the entire world. It's very much about like healing the individual.
Well, then there's the last follow-up. Is there anything in the Hermetica that you find personally objectionable? Like, yeah, I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to do that. And like, that's bad advice. Or this doesn't seem like the nous talking.
I mean, bad advice. There's a thing in Corpus Hermeticum 2 that talks about how important it is to have kids. I'm not very big on that. I know that gets reinterpreted. I can feel like I can hear Sam typing from across the continent right now. That gets reinterpreted sort of like, they're spiritual children. They're not like literal children. Corpus Hermeticum 7, I'm not a big fan of non-dualism. A lot of times when I come across non-dualism in the Corpus Hermeticum, I reject it. Like, I enjoy the idea that the material world is absolutely divine, or that the material body is not part of who I am. So those things I'm not always really big on. So yeah, and I think that that's something you have to pay attention to when you're reading the Hermetic. A lot of different mystics, different things being written down. We don't know how well organized they were, if they were organized at all. And they have different ideas about stuff. We don't have as much of their stuff as we do like the Gnostic teachings. You know, like with Gnosticism, we can trace things back to specific schools and we can see where individual teachings came from. A lot of times with the Hermetic, we've just got fragments, or we've got like the Corpus Hermeticum, so we don't know who wrote it. Yes.
On that point, is it maybe talking about similarities and differences between Hermeticism and different Gnosticisms?
I feel like that would be a really good talk. I'm not going to do it. I don't know enough about Gnosticism. Yes.
How much do you, I noticed that you think that Miranda is a character? As a Kabbalist, how much do you think the Corpus Hermeticum contributes to Christian Kabbalists or Kabbalah, or do you think it contributes at all to like Kabbalah?
So the question for online people is, did Hermeticism contribute to Christian Kabbalah kind of overall? Well, so Mirandola had access primarily to the Asclepius, like in his oration on the dignity of man, he quotes the Asclepius right at the beginning. It's a really good question for Pico's stuff. Like he was kind of all over the place. Even his version of Kabbalah was kind of weird, you know. I think I'm sure that there's some really good papers written about this, so I'm probably just making some stuff up here, but I kind of think like Hermeticism had such a big impact on Renaissance magic. You know, Hermes Trismegistus is mentioned in Agrippa. The publication of the Corpus Hermeticum was very influential. Scholars still arguing about how influential it was, but the influence didn't last, right? Because in the 1600s, Isaac Casaubon sort of proved that it wasn't as old as everybody was thinking, and did get kind of discarded. It was a rough century for occultists in general, the 17th century. So it's hard to know. It's hard to say for sure, especially since Pacino's translation was kind of flawed.
Yeah.
So there was some stuff there that didn't make sense and that didn't really reflect what the Corpus Hermeticum actually said. It's a good question, and I do not have an awesome answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
I could have misunderstood this from the beginning, but did you say that there was a connection between the elements of the PGM or the parts of the PGM and the Hermeticum?
Yeah. So the question I'm going to what you said for the is are there connections between parts of the PGM and the Hermetica? Yes. Sometimes they're kind of nebulous. A lot of times the connection is sort of made between like, you know, say like mentions of the Agathos daimon, which shows up in the PGM quite often, and in the Hermetica, mention of different like gods who are present in different Hermetica, like that tends to sort of tie things together. Hermeticism sort of like developed a lot over several hundred years, and things kind of got like drawn into it and associated with in various times. And nowadays, I think a lot of like practicing Hermeticists use things from the PGM. There are some great like invocations of Agathos daimon or Helios that just feel Hermetic and fit nicely into it. And also like it's impossible to resist the allure of barbarous names. Right? Oh, the Greek magical papyri.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Any other online questions?
You had some.
Oh no. Hermeticism and empathy. At the end of book 1, Poimandres charges Hermes to go out. Oh, that's true. You know, This is in the prayer. You are actually told in Corpus Hermeticum that your job is to go forth and teach other people about the possibility of like seeing the divine, of having the divine experience. So there is actually something read in book 1. Yeah, that's okay. I'll just read this. I'll read this. Even if some people don't have mind, which means nous, depending on how you read the, it doesn't mean that they can't have mind. Depending on how you read the texts, some people lack it but can receive it, where everyone has it, but it's dormant in some people until it's activated by Gnostic experience. But there's nothing that forbids one from spiritual development. All humanity is family equally. Yeah. All right. I think that.
That's a good closing.
I think it's a good closing. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to me go through everything. Go to darkstarmagic.com and buy a book.